Thank you. What a lovely presentation, I hope. So it's a true pleasure to be here in Vilnius today, not only because of the topic, but because of the moment we find ourselves in. We're living in times where creativity is everywhere. And yet, strangely, it's harder than ever to recognize. A time where talent is celebrated, but increasingly defined by systems that were never designed to understand it. So let me begin with a simple question. What is talent? Is it something you're born with? Is it something you build? Or is it something you decide to see? There's a story about Pablo Picasso. A woman approaches him in a cafe and asks him to draw something on a napkin. He does, quickly, effortlessly, and hands it to her. She looks at it and says, "How much do I owe you?" And Picasso replies, 10,000 francs. And she laughs, "But it only took you a few seconds." And Picasso responds, "No, madam, it took me 40 years. And that is talent. Not the moment of execution, but the invisible accumulation behind it. The years, the failures, the instincts shaped over time. And most importantly, the ability to recognize something meaningful before anyone else does. And one of the great paradoxes in human history is this. Many of the people we later call geniuses were not clearly recognized in their own time. Van Gogh sold almost no paintings during his lifetime. Franz Kafka asked for his manuscripts to be destroyed. Emily Dickinson published very little poetry during her lifetime. And in music, entire genres were once dismissed as noise, rebellion, or low culture. And later, of course, they became an important part of our culture. Jazz, hip-hop, electronic music. The pattern repeats itself constantly, not because humanity lacks talent, but because institutions often struggle to recognize what does not resemble the familiar. And this matters deeply today, because our systems have become faster, but not necessarily wiser. We risk creating culture where originality is punished in its earliest stages simply because it behaves differently from existing patterns. But here's where it becomes interesting, because while talent itself may not have fundamentally changed, our way of seeing it has. In earlier times, talent was often recognized through proximity. You saw someone perform, you heard them in a room, you experienced their presence. Recognition was local, relational, human. Today, talent is increasingly mediated through systems, through platforms, through algorithms, through metrics. And these systems do something very powerful. We often say they measure talent, and sometimes we say they even shape it. But I would argue something more fundamental. They don't really identify talent at all. They identify visibility. And even that, only a very narrow frame within. What we're actually seeing is not shaping of talent, but a selection of what is allowed to appear. It can feel as if the system is shaping creativity, that artists adapt, adjust, optimize. But perhaps what is really happening is simpler. One type of expression is given space. It becomes visible. It circulates. And everything else does not disappear, but remains unseen. And today, many young creators are learning something very dangerous, very early. Not how to create, but how to optimize, how to fit an algorithm, how to hold attention for 8 seconds, how to simplify expression into something instantly recognizable. And of course, adaptation has always been a part and existed in culture. Artists have always responded to audiences. But there's a difference between dialogue and dependency. If every creative decision becomes shaped by prediction systems, we slowly reduce the space where surprise can exist. And surprise is essential to culture. Because real talent often arrives before we have a language for it. The truly new rarely looks successful in the beginning. So the systems does not necessarily shape talent, it filters reality. And here's the deeper consequence. There are no truly public spaces online, only privately governed visibility. And when visibility is governed, exploration becomes fragile. Because talent that searches for something that does not yet exist has nowhere to land. It cannot compete on metrics because it does not yet belong to the categories those metrics are built to recognize. So it's not rejected, it's simply not encountered. And let me ask you something then. How many extraordinary people have existed without ever being discovered? How many composers have never been recorded? How many writers never published? How many inventors lacked access? And how many children were born in places where talent had no infrastructure around it? We often speak about talent as if it naturally rises. History tells us something else. Talent is fragile. And visibility is never equally distributed. And over time, this creates a quiet but profound shift. Not in talent itself. This creates a shift that changes what we believe talent to be. So let me give you an example from my own field, music. Today, hundreds of thousands of tracks are uploaded every single day across platforms globally. And yet, around 158 million tracks receive fewer than 1,000 clicks per year. Not because they lack meaning, but because they're never surfaced. So what are we really measuring? Talent or permission to be seen? Because if we measure what is visible, we risk overlooking what truly matters. There's a quote often attributed to Albert Einstein. Not everything that can be counted counts, and not everything that counts can be counted. But interestingly, that quote is also attributed in more reliable sources to the sociologist William Bruce Cameron, which proves a deeper point. Without clear attribution, credit, without proof of creation, even meaning itself becomes unstable. So perhaps the safest thing here is to give them both credit and at the same time recognize that in a world without reliable attribution, credit, we cannot fully support, invest in, or fairly remunerate what we value. And this is not philosophical. This is infrastructural. Because talent is not only about output, it's about impact over time. And impact requires recognition. Recognition requires attribution, and attribution requires systems. So the problem is not data, The problem is what we measure and what we fail to make visible in the first place. And this is where innovation enters. Because innovation is not neutral, it encodes decisions. And if we build systems in isolation from creators, we will continue to build systems that misunderstand what they are trying to serve. But something is beginning to change. I and many others are now working closely with innovators, engineers, and technologists, not as users, but as co-creators. Because creative industries will only be truly prosperous if innovation happens with creators and not around them. This is what I call co-innovation. And one example is the emerging Fair Music project, led in the framework of the International Music Council with technological development driven by the new internet media and supported at a European level. It brings together creators, institutions, and technologists to rethink how music is identified, tracked, and valued. And this becomes even more important in the age of generative AI, because for the first time in history, human culture is not only being consumed by machines, it's being used to train them. That changes the relationship entirely. A song is no longer only a song, and a painting is no longer only a painting. Creative works have become behavioral data, and if attribution happens inside that process, then creators become invisible at the moment their work becomes most valuable. This is if it disappears, the attribution. And this is why recognition infrastructure matters, not only for fairness, but for the future legitimacy of culture itself. And this becomes especially important when we talk about AI, because AI does not understand creativity. It learns patterns, and the question becomes, what patterns are we feeding it? If we feed only what is visible, we reinforce visibility. But through systems such as GEO-based tracking and contextual data, we can begin to teach AI also what was intended. So where a piece of music is used, in what context, and for what purpose. And that's a completely different data set. And once AI begins to learn from that, it begins to understand relationships within culture, which brings us back, of course, to talent. Because the future of talent is not only about individuals, it is about the systems that allow it to exist. So perhaps the challenge before us now is not to slow technology down, of course, but to humanize the values embedded within it. To build systems capable not only of ranking attention, but of protecting possibility. Systems that leave room for experimentation, for slowness, for complexity, and for the unfinished, for the difficult, and for the strange. Because those spaces are often where future first appears. So what can we do? Well, we rethink measurement. We build prior recognition. We allow failure. We teach perception. And we collaborate across domains, which we do here today. Because the future of talent will emerge between disciplines. And let me return to the beginning. What is talent? Perhaps talent is not something we have. Perhaps it's something that we allow. Because in the end, the greatest advantage we have as humans is not what we can measure, it's what we can imagine. And that is the unmeasurable advantage. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Karabuda, for your insights. Now you can see the QR code and you can scan it and you can type your questions to Mr. Karabuda. Questions are already flowing, but I'd like to start with mine. Sorry. You talked about the importance of the surprise. What surprises you today? Keeping in mind that you see a lot of talented, creative people almost every day.
I'm surprised that we have a room full of very attentive people at this stage and this hour of the day.
And really, one more presentation left.
Yeah, but I really, truly, I mean, I joke aside, I can feel that there's a true interest, and that gives inspiration not only to me, but among yourselves. So I think this dialogue is very important.
Do you think we lose a lot of talents because they don't fit into the boxes that are out there, and how can we escape this problem?
I think it's a huge problem. It's not only the fact that we lose talent, we actually make, or you convince yourself that you need to change in order to fit in. So maybe we don't lose them, but we self-censor ourselves to fit into these boxes. And okay, so then we have them all in the boxes, but we have narrowed the creativity. And I think that's very dangerous. I work with censorship as a vice chair of FreeMuse with artistic freedom, etc. But in our countries, we tend to forget the self-censorship and the importance of not trying to fit in a box.
But how not to miss those talents then, especially when we open almost any app on our phone and there are many people, many talented people, many painters, many artists, many musicians, many singers, many dancers, many whatever. It's so many of them.
It would be easy for me now to talk about these great values, about just ethics and something that sounds, high on a higher level than what we do on a daily basis. But I will say that the most important thing could be money. And that sounds maybe not so, it's not as beautiful to say, but without money, we cannot be professional and we cannot continue to develop and even maybe have the strength to question, criticizing of things as well. So I think that creating systems that allow for those outside the mainstream is something that will promote diversity, but it's also good for business because the great blockbusters, the hits, usually come from the unexpected. It's not the copies of the copies of the copies, but it's something where you have the courage and the inspiration to do something unexpected once again.
We have questions flowing, how to ensure that there would be less impact of optimization in the creative process, or maybe how to balance it to get visibility but not to lose creativity.
Well, I think that a great danger is, of course, when you have very few places where you can reach out with your voice, your art. So what we need good competition. And we need, of course, also not only competition in companies, but competition in countries. That's a healthy competition, because as it is now, we have systems that allow global to become local. But we have difficulties in making the local becoming global. And that is very important for companies and our countries like Lithuania, and I'm from Sweden, it's the same thing. Fairly small countries where we have to compete on creativity, we have to compete on innovation, and we need to be able to be visible without being the highest, blockbuster or hit on a playlist.
A similar question was already asked, but I will read that as well. Maybe you'll have some additional insights. As we know, Bach was almost lost to history. How many valuable and talented creators could be lost to the history today, and how can we help to discover them?
It's actually 4,300 and... No, it's not. But it's what I say also in my speech. It's impossible, but I think it's fair to say that there's a huge amount, and we shouldn't be maybe talking about history as if that was so much better than now. I'm optimistic, and we also have lowered the threshold for creators to enter the stage, to do something, because we have technology enabling us to do that. But I have to say that a lot of these fantastic composers, I'm sure there were so many more than those. And I have to say that some of them also could have made much more of their beautiful music if they didn't have an emperor or a king that prompted what they were supposed to write.
Talking about money, how can we measure the immeasurable and explain to the state budget decision makers that it has value for society? Because we have that problem not only in Lithuania, I believe in other countries as well. And this question, by the way, is not mine. I'm just adding to it. Yeah. But it seems that we do agree that culture is very important and creative people are very important, but at the same time we have extremely high cuts from the cultural budget, especially this year in Lithuania. So it's like a paradox here, at least here.
You have to use good examples, and we also need to use those of our colleagues that are more famous than ourselves, because usually that is a good way of convincing policymakers and politicians. So when we have our most famous composers or artists saying that I wouldn't have been able to do this if I hadn't the free education as a child. I have a friend of mine, Max Martin, maybe you know him, a music producer, and this is what he said when we go to politicians, saying that without this and without a room where we could have rehearsed, there would be no hits. And when politicians see that and try to figure out how much money the country actually would have lost, that's a conviction. But then I have to say that music and art needs to have a right to exist without creating any money, of course, because it's the unexpectable where it influences us as individuals and as a society.
Do you think in this digital era live music concerts will be more popular, and will we be more interested in live performances than in digital tracks? And may I also add to the question, how will maybe the perception of the singers or musicians change? Because we know that musicians usually now get the bigger amount of money from the live concerts, from the touring, than from the digital music they make.
It's interesting because money-wise, where AI is going in is often in the digital field, where the money is quite scarce. It's not really the best opportunities for them. So many are looking for the money in concerts and live, and I think that's a fairly safe area, because we will continue to want to go to concerts. And as you say, when we have billions of tracks overflowing us, we want to be able to connect. And we want to be able to see that this was made by a human. We can relate to it. I often say that if it didn't matter, why does a TV series on Netflix, for example, say that it was based on a true story? Because it matters. We want to know. We want to relate. And that, to be able to relate to the live performances, we will definitely continue with.
Do you think everyone can be creative, or this skill requires something specific?
I think we can be. Actually, I talked to a few colleagues here during the coffee break. I was the president of the International Music Council, and we had a board member from China, and he was also the head of education for pianists. And I said that, so I asked him, so how many students do you have? 10 million, he said. And then he said, I'm not expecting every one of these to become professional pianists, but they will understand music, and through music they will also become better, whatever politicians, teachers, or working with anything they do. So I think that it's a matter of being able to take part of culture, not always because you want to be a star, but it will change your life. And through that, you will be able to change other people's lives.
Art deserves the freedom to exist beyond profitability, but can the same be said about creative industries?
It's an interesting question. I'm not sure that I understand. If creative industries, I think it's a way that we have defined it. We call it industries, but to me, it's a matter of joining different parts of arts and the creatives. So to me, it's not only about money, even though it is a part of it. It's a matter of creating a dialogue, creating new collaborations. So it creates new value, and that value is not only financial. So it does have its place, I would say.
We cannot probably turn away from the metrics, absolutely, but how not to burn out? Try to keeping up with them, especially when you're already at least a little bit known. So you have views, you have like stream listens, you have, I don't know, attendance to your exhibitions, whatever. And then you become addicted to it, obviously, because you're, as an artist, you want to be seen, you want to be heard. How not to get burned out? I know it's a hard one.
I wish I could have an answer to that, but I'm burned out. But I guess the easy thing would be, to say just shut down, go out in nature. But I don't really believe that. I think that taking part of others' culture, other people's expression, is something that gives you energy as well. But it is a difficult question. It's if you have to go into that field and kind of seeing your goal as only achieving through metrics, you will probably be burnt out. So the important thing is to find the other values and believe in them. And it's important for us to also support others who are creating and showing that. Because that is very important. It matters. It can matter just hearing it from one person saying that it was really important what you created. And that, to me, changed, if not my life, it changed that day or a part of my life. And that is something that will give you a reason to continue. That has happened to me, for sure.
How can we use AI tools to strengthen human creativity rather than the narrowing our understanding of what talent is and what talented person is?
I think that almost all creators have something that they want to express. And previously, at least in my life, that was very difficult to express because I had a notion of what I wanted to compose, but I didn't have the money or the technology, being able to go into that studio with those musicians. And in a way, technology helps us going over that threshold now to start creating and reaching something that is closer to what your intention was. So I think in that way we have democratized the creation, but we have centralized the financial value to very few.
And the last one, I think this is a very serious one. How can cultural institutions balance evidence-based evaluation with the need to support experimentation, risk-taking, and long-term creative development?
Well, you should go with everything you learned, with everything that you can measure, but one day a week you should say that now I will do the opposite to anything that I've learned. Put your efforts into something that you don't believe in, that you've never seen, because you will create something of value through that.
Thank you so much for your answers. Thank you for your presentation and thank you for your insights.
Thank you. Thank you.